pleased I'm on. I presumed I'd been on this at some point, but in the past, not having known you for like 5 years, whatever. And I bet I don't take any notice of what I have done or haven't done on which podcast. I just do loads. So I apologize. I've not been on this in the past. No, actually, I blame you.
It's all me. It's all me. It's fun.
But I love your intro. It's very professional.
I know. Try my best. Just ruining it with the background somewhat.
Yeah.
So why do you do what you do, Simon?
Quick timeline. I'm old, so I was like first generation of sports scientist. Maybe I think I was the third year at University of Birmingham. And what do you do as a career path? Because there was no career path. We have all S&Cs in the country complaining about the pathway now. There was no pathway because there was no job sucker. So trailblazer, you can just call me a trailblazer. So we have to kind of figure out how you're going to pay bills and what really inspires and stimulates. And I've always been much more about the day-to-day, what did I do today, rather than how much money did I make today, and what fulfilled me, and challenges. And I've been curious. And so over the course of 15 years or so, working with right across any kind of spectrum of general population, of doing aerobics classes to 150 uni students, to grannies in a class, to local amateur sports, to world champion sprinters, and Premier League football, and county level cricket, and international basketball. So I've never felt myself as preferring any particular sport over any other. Like there was a whole influx of rugby fairly early in my career. That was the early adopters of S&C, of which S&C didn't exist when I was early in my career. So anyway, long story short, ramble. I had kids, discovered I liked working with kids, my own mainly, and my wife is a primary school PE teacher, and I kind of helped out at her school a little bit and really enjoyed it, and saw that the quality of their PE experience wasn't what I was expecting. So we formulated in our facility stuff, classes that kids can discover sporting skills and actually their movement skills, and can you catch, and they can't even stand on one leg. So we kind of regressed those into really basic games, of which they're starting to learn skills and then master their own body. Around the same time, this was like 5 years ago, we quickly, for Superheroes, the government offered primary schools £10,000 to develop physical literacy. That was literally their only statement that came with this £10,000. Here, £10,000, ring fence, you can't spend it on anything else but improve physical literacy. It was called the School Sports Premium. And a year later, they kind of looked at what happened with it, and schools just spent it on minibuses. And without guidance, they had no idea what to do. But my wife asked me what this means and if I could help in any way. So we did a little bit of research, looked through what physical literacy meant, and it means anything to anybody. It's the opposite of ubiquitous. There is no defined, but also it might be the most defined term, dependent on if you're a middle-aged cardigan wearer from Norwich, or you are an S&C that works with Olympians. It means so many different things. So we kind of looked in our realm of movement specialists, S&Cs, at the best coaches in the world. So Vern Gambetta, so Kelvin Giles, and then looked at the research. We got Avery Fagenbaum, Mark Tremblay, and then later on Joe Eisenman, and looked to put together some kind of toolbox which formulated into a pathway, and then our syllabus progressive matrix, basically, of skills, and that's kind of where we're at.
Very nice, very nice. And with all the different populations you've mentioned there, do you feel like there's a linking philosophy, or how you would go about, say, I don't know, training 5-year-olds versus those 8-year-old grandmas that you mentioned?
Well, yeah, one of the things I discovered, because I literally have an 81-year-old client who relatively pays us to train every day since 2002.
Wow.
And he is a rock star, and his wife is 63 now, so also 18, 19 years of training. And trying to be as reflective as possible. This is going through phases of the culture of S&C. And maybe 10 years ago, there was like 12 years ago, maybe just after the advent of UKSCA, and then there was this big conference called UCSEM, where sports medicine and sports science tried to converge over a conference, and it was a fantastic thing, but it never kind of took off after that. And they started to introduce a little bit more structure and reflective practice. And I started writing stuff down, and how about my approach, what do I enjoy, what sets me apart. And the things really that I discovered were that in the marketplace, most of the coaches I speak to, and most of the coaches I observed, particularly in S&C, worked at, with kids, they would coach them as though they were less able international sports people. So the goal was always the international sports person, and they would just regress so they were a less able version of that. And my approach was really with 80-year-olds or tennis players or international footballers, was to treat them like they were 7-year-olds and expand from that core movement quality of a 7-year-old and enthusiasm of a 7-year-old, and try to make it as play-like as possible, and then expand how far you can reach, how far you can jump from this position, how much body control do you have from here, can you catch it, and then start to add weights, rather than look at this number, we need to hit 2 times back squat. Well, I don't care if you can hit 2 times back squat if you can't touch your toes, or if you can't reach 1.5 meters for a ball on one leg without falling over. So I regressed it all back to basically being a 7-year-old. And I would apply that to everybody in every context. And then we would expand to their limits from there. So it was a very individualized approach for everybody. And
just, this is something I've kind of loosely thought about for a few years. I remember training a guy in his 70s, and when I managed to borrow some lecture slides off St Mary's, they were talking about how the body develops in terms of from a baby right around to being like a 90-year-old, and almost that you come full circle in the sense of, for example, I think it's first you can lift your head up and then the core starts to strengthen a little bit. And I was thinking, actually looking at my nan when she was still with us, it was always literally you go in reverse. Like, for example, as soon as you lose the ability to stand and sit, it's like, great, you can move your arms and maybe raise your legs, but you can't stand and sit. I was thinking, actually, just pretty much what you've said there, the elderly and the young need to be trained in a similar way, in the sense of, like you said, very basic movements, and almost, yes, they need to be strong, but actually they need to probably be able to move in different ways. They need to have strength, a little bit of strength in different positions. Because I think, as an example, if you're an 80-year-old and you fall on the ground, you're not going to rise in this sort of textbook squat, or even like, I don't know, a Turkish get-up sort of way. It's going to be a bit awkward. It's not going to be, oh, well, you've got to put this hand here and this hand here. So yeah, just listening to you talk then, I was like, actually, what does an elderly adult need? Probably not 5 sets of 5 back squat.
But that's really interesting, right, that you use those two, because another question I get asked a lot is who do I enjoy working with most? And I get something out of everybody. Yeah. My least favorite cohort, my least favorite demographic is 20-year-old bloke, 25-year-old bloke. I don't enjoy working with elite professional footballers particularly, but sportsmen is just, I like that least of any of the cohorts I work with, because I feel like, going back to the first thing I said, at the end of the day, what did I achieve? Nothing. I picked up some water bottles, I made him squat the thing. I counted the number of squats that he was going to do because he was only going to do that. Did I make him better? No, not really. And in a big grand, we could go off at a grand tangent here because I'm currently of the thinking I'm not sure how much sports science improves human performance at the extreme level. I don't think we improve ultimate human performance, the thing that an awful lot of S&Cs and sports scientists like to latch onto, that's the thing they do, and I don't think it is anymore. I thoroughly don't believe that. But going back to this child and elderly, you were saying that St Mary's were saying how this cycle happens. So I believe in pre-adulthood and then the post-adulthood in the pensioner years are the least well researched, the least well documented, the least well practiced training areas. I don't believe in most of the science that I see, most of the literature I see in the youth market, and I don't believe any of it in the elderly market. I don't believe that you get less able to move, less able to produce force, I don't believe any of that. I believe inactivity causes that. Yeah. And that inactivity can happen at 25. And at 60, you've just had more time for it to have occurred. And I've got 80-year-old, as I say, that literally box jumps and overhead squats, and he's got 2 replaced knees. And there's nothing he can't do. He just probably takes a little bit longer to recover from it. And why would you reduce those challenges? Because your birth certificate is from a long time ago. That makes no sense to me. I track, so now everybody is testing or monitoring, and thanks to the Apple Watch, we can do like HRV, it's just innately regular. But I literally have got data up until 3 years ago, every weekday, every week since 2002 with some of our clients. And this one old guy, and HRV is predictive stress, so I can see, you can actually predict, if you've got enough data, this isn't right, he's going to get ill. And you can spot that he's going to get ill. But also, I can see, because of using regular monitoring, that his cardiac response or his resting heart rate, the effects of his resting heart rate depend on his training volume. And all this stuff aligns perfectly with what it would if he was 25. And he's 80 and he was 60. Do you know what I mean? So he innately should be getting worse, and he's not. Only gets worse when he goes on holiday for 3 months because he hasn't been training. So I don't believe, I like that elderly market. I like the under adult market, because I think we can make the biggest impact with those 2 areas.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've chatted to mutual friends of ours offline, and they've said stuff like, what's your niche market for your podcast? And I won't mention names. So I had a good friend of ours literally send me back a screenshot, and it's like, here you're talking to these people in high performance sport, and here you're talking about people with how to deal with 5-year-olds. And it's like, well, that's just, I feel most energized from working with younger kids, but I'm also part geeky and enjoy, I suppose, the physiological adaptations. But I remember a chat that we had at a conference a while ago. So I'll just go down that tangent, if you will. But when you were saying about how much have we actually improved human performance at the elite level, and you said something along the lines of, if force plate data was the answer, then we would be seeing these performances. So what other things would you chuck into that bucket of, it's easy for us to feel confident, but are we actually improving performance? Is there any other things that
just easily, the most very obvious thing is, if you look at the world records at the Olympic events, look at world records at the Olympics. There's one uptick in any of real strand of the athletic, of track and field, of human performance, and that was the early 90s of women, when suddenly they took steroids too. and we're now about like in some of those sports, we're at a 20% drop in those speed. Like no one's getting close to those anymore. Or if you look at the great Mo Farah dominating world endurance sports, yet he was 15% off the speed of world record speeds while he was dominating. So he was the best in the world, and nobody was close to those early millennial times. Like there is no evidence that we're pushing human capabilities. All we're doing is removing the fatty from the Premier League. So the minimum, so we're not pushing ceilings, we are expanding the floor, basically. We have raised the standard of the floor, but we've made it more accessible because our programs and pathways have created better quality athletes. So average Joe now in the Premier League can run 11.6k, 600 meters of sprint, of high speed distance. You know, the average.
I just lost all audio from the last about 20 seconds. You still with us?
Yeah, I'm good.
Awesome. Bit of editing job, but we'll crack on. The last thing I heard was about the average Joe in the Premier League and raising the floor rather than raising the ceiling.
Yeah, so we haven't improved the elite levels. We've just improved the average guy up to somewhere near closer to the elite levels. So now Ronaldo doesn't stand out from being this behemoth. So we're getting fewer. If you look at using the Premier League as an example, we could use rugby because that would be a better example. But I'm probably understand the football better. So whenever there is a new generation of athlete come through, so in the Premier League we had a game changer was Wenger, because he suddenly had the trust in Vieira, and you got a 6'4" athletic behemoth. He was rapid. He'd get about the pitch more than anybody else, and he was huge. And then we had Thierry Henry, who took that on as a whole different level. And then football started to recruit guys that looked like them, and they could see the value in their physical performance. So suddenly you got rid of Matthew Letizier's, and you replaced them with guys that were just lesser skilled Thierry Henrys. So the standard just rose of the speed, but the actual top speed never did. And we've done that across all sports. You can see it in tennis. Now the women, Serena broke in 18 years ago or whatever, and completely dominant because she was bigger, faster, stronger than everybody else. Was that training, or did she happen to just be a different demographic than everybody else and is bigger, faster, stronger? She is undoubtedly the best in the world ever in her sport. Is she the only person in the world that could do the things she has done? Don't know, because the door was always closed to her demographic. So we just opened the demographic to a new sport, and we've highlighted that power is probably more important in tennis than we thought it was. It's not just about being able to do it for 4 hours, because it only happens like in less than 2% of games that there's a more than 2 hour game. So we've not really progressed the highest level. It's just about raising the quality of athlete. That's all.
And without going on a complete tangent, I don't know whether you've listened to the name's now going to elude me. Science for Sport podcast on the 2
Ross Tucker.
Yes, that's the one. But yeah, just saying, actually, he doesn't count the 2 hour marathon because he's like, we've not actually improved human physiology. We've got very good at making it more efficient. So for example, the shoes, the car, the pacemakers, having an ideal marathon course, making sure that the temperature is ideal, but we've not actually pushed human performance, and therefore he doesn't count it. So it kind of sounds like
so the thing that we found, we've scienced the shit out of this, so that we know all of the environmental constraints. We can manipulate the environment, but we're not actually manipulating the output of the human.
I'm going to have that as my little tagline for the podcast: science the shit out of it.
Not the way you expect it to go, is it?
not on a podcast designed talking about StrengthLab Superheros, but it's all good. It's all good.
And primary kids.
Ironically, that leads nicely into bad statistics and measuring this ambiguous term that is physical literacy. So segueing into that slightly, I remember reading a tweet of yours which was countering people who said that Liverpool players were more fatigued than last season, and therefore that's resulted in decrements in performance. So just using that as a little segue, how should we be measuring this physical literacy, if indeed it should be measured at all?
I would start my fundamental measurement of physical literacy is to have some kind to have a specific toolbox of drills, skills, and challenges, and my measurement would be time doing them. That should be it. Just how opportunity to practice work on these things. Because I think we're so far behind the evolutionary human curve of these things that our science and technology has made us lazier, slower, more sloth-like and sedentary, that we're undoing the natural evolutionary curve. I don't care about measuring how good those good kids are and making the bad ones fail. I just want them to do more. If you practice more, even if we expand it just to S&C, if you get a kid and they're in the gym and you give them 5 exercises to do whenever they come in, and they come in 4 times a week, they will just get better. I don't care. Do we really need to measure how much better? We just know they're going to get better. So just adherence is fundamentally the most important thing. If we're wanting to quantify improvement for say for Ofsted, would be a good example, because they love a statistic, and parents they like to see a trajectory. How Superheroes works is that we have objective binary. Did they do this? Did they get into this shape or not? So we award 5 stars, up to 5 stars for a skill, and kids can assess each other. Did their bottom get below their knees? Yes or no? And then that, as long as it's been adequately appropriately written in the first place, so there is a progression in complexity or volume or intensity, then you can start to develop a trajectory of mastery of a skill set. That's kind of our thinking. I really would prefer not to, but kids do like to see some level of objective progression, and they like to see that they've achieved something. But from a sports science testing battery of, I could not like to see less opta jump or jump mats or timing gates in a kid's school. I don't want to see even secondary school kids getting shown around an elite performance lab. I don't want them to have that experience. I want them to go and master shapes and then external stimulus challenges of, can you climb over this, jump around this, and then roll while catching a ball. I don't know how easy that is to test for. I think some of the stuff that our friend James talks about, having an athletic skills track, and then you just time it. I think that if the outcome of this parkour challenge requires some kind of physical skill development, and the faster you do it, you've obviously mastered them better, probably, or you're just better at the course. But you being better at the course means you've had to adapt some kind of skill that is transferable. So that probably is the best thing.
And there's a couple of things that I've jotted down just as you've said there. So the first thing, and we'll talk about this in a second, for me is something you said in another podcast, which is, and it happens again a lot in education, whether kids
You're stalking me, aren't
you? Secretly I am. I do like to do my homework, but it was saying about in education settings, there's a big drive for our kids getting more knowledgeable, or are they just understanding the test better? So therefore, for example, if, I don't know, you test kids in a year's time and, oh, shock horror, their jump went up because they knew how to do the jump chest, versus, for example, they're bending their hips better, or they're coordinating their arm swing better. But what I like about what you've said there is you basically said, right, as long as we're getting markers on the process, we'll get the outcome. Whereas I think S&C, we're guilty of, let's just measure the outcome. And, you know, I'm sure we've all been there where you've either had to test kids because of technical coaches and you're like, well, I can tell you in the warm-up that they can't coordinate. I can tell you in the warm-up that their sprint time is going to be bad. But now you want me to put a number on it to tell you just how bad they are, or to be able to stroke my own ego and show you that there'll be 6 weeks of anything, any structure, they're going to be better. And then we'll laud S&C as best practice.
Yeah, it's crazy. And if we delve into that a little bit, if you're testing, so working in a football academy, we have to test I don't even know. The director is absolutely fine, loves my methods and doesn't care for any kind of testing, but the coaches and then parents want some kind of testing to feel like they're in a high performance setting. So we do some, very limited. But the thing is, if you're doing a bleep test, which is what they like, or 30-15, the kids, if you do it 3 times in a month, they'll get better because the kids know how to, they learn the skill and learn how to cheat. But on top of that, you working with kids on any given day, they could be completely different. And particularly working with girls and teenage girls, what you said about warm-ups, so important. I could tell you in the warm-up who's going to have on the jump mat, who's going to perform better than others. I can tell you, we have basically we have wobbly days. The girls know. I can see in the literally, I'm not exaggerating. I can see in the first 10 seconds of a warm up if a girl's going to have a wobbly day. And if they're going to have a wobbly day, they just do what they can. There is no judgment on what they do. You're just going to fall over. We'll probably laugh at you a little bit. You can laugh at yourself because it's one of those things, but it's just a wobbly day. And they literally wobble and fall over while they're doing a plank. And it's very, very common. And that day might be test day. And so what does that mean? What are we proving here? I know as a coach, I can see my kids develop. Do you need me to put a number on it? I like to do it. I create a triangular skills model. So I have a coachability, talent, so natural athleticism, basically, and then a skill. And then I award my subjective view on that triangular graph, basically a little triangle radar. And we try to fill it as much as possible. But you can't get around, some kids are going to be faster than others because they're born genetically more gifted that way. But you can, with culture, change how coachable they are. And you can then also, with good skill and good coaching environment, nurture how athletic they become. So you can fill that as best as possible with strategic planning and goals in mind and creating the right environment. And they know this from each other. But determining whether or not some kid has performed well because they jumped higher or they pushed more force into the ground that day compared to 6 weeks ago, I just think it's so reductive, counterproductive. And in this current environment where we have very little relative or actual face time developing these kids, if we're wasting it by lining them up and then testing them, shoot me.
Yeah. And I quite like what you were saying earlier in the podcast about, and this is how I've done my virtual PE, because we, for safeguarding reasons, we're not allowed to have the kids' cameras on and whatever. So the coaching is almost differentiating itself as, all right, see how far you can reach. Like we were messing around with, if you've seen any of GMB Fitness's content, but they break skills down very well because they often deal with older people trying to learn gymnastic-y based skills for the first time. And they'll literally be like, right, see how far you can move without falling over in, for example, a forward roll progression. And it's like, see how much of this you can. So rather than saying, for example, see how many reps you can do in 30 seconds, which again, I'll get on my soapbox if I end up talking about that for too long with training kids.
I am fine with that. I'm fine with that as a metabolic challenge.
If that's what the aim is, yeah. The issue I have with it is a lot of the kids I work with, like we did, for example, as a department, we did a squat challenge where they had to stack 4 toilet rolls up. How many can you do in 60 seconds? And they were like, right, send us your videos, you get house point for it. And then I was looking at some of them, I'm like, those toilet rolls are pretty high and I didn't see you touch it once. But thank you for sending me the video. But no, all fun and games. But yeah, I don't mind that sort of stuff if I feel like they move well enough to either A, justify it, or if they're engaged well enough to enjoy it. The issue I have is a lot of times you'll get in some of my classes, you have 2 kids who are naturally sporty, who will be like, when are we doing the bleep test? When are we doing some more running? And then the other 28 kids who, you know, would probably rather flush their head down the toilet than be made to do a bloody bleep test. But yeah, it's going down to how well they can move. It reminds me of another podcast I did where we were talking about physical literacy and being a good mover. And is a good mover the person who jumps the highest, sprints the fastest, can squat the most weight? Or is it the person who you can just drag and drop into any sporting environment? They haven't necessarily been coached in the skill, like you said with the parkour courses, and they've just got that movement toolbox to be able to adapt. And to be honest, I'm not so sure when I've worked with kids and when I work with more elite athletes that the ones who are physically superior are always necessarily better at their sport. Obviously, there's a lot of context missing from that, but that's sort of where my thinking's been going of late.
I would pose a question to that, in that you get that kid who has a really broad movement vocabulary, right? Would you question the dude who was brought up in a house whose dad was a builder and uncle was an electrician and other uncle was a carpenter and his mom was a mechanic, and had over the course of his 16 years couldn't read or write very well, just enough to get by at school, but he could change a bulb, he could fit your he could change a tire, he could change a spark plug, and he could lay the plumbing in your house. Probably didn't have any qualifications in those. He probably wasn't the best plumber in the world, or he couldn't go and change a car, a Formula One, whatever. But he had a really broad physical range of skills, right? My question would be, if you gave that kid 2 years at Mercedes working with Lewis Hamilton's car and the people around there that could teach him that, would he be more or less likely to excel in that than a kid who didn't have any of those skills that started, but only worked as a car mechanic? And my thinking is that he will think in a more rounded way, be more curious, practically curious about problem solving, and the outcome might be a little bit higher. That's my feeling. It's just that kid from a movement setting has not specialized in a skill long enough to excel at that one particular skill as well as another kid. That's all. But he has this broad variety, and he probably could get to that skill level given a quarter of the time that the original kid that's only dedicated to that time. And isn't that the point?
Yeah. And I think it's, for example, if you were teaching your own kids to jump and all you did every day was, I'm going to teach you standing long jump, teach you standing long jump, versus going to expose you to many different hops, jumps, leaps, landings, twisting, rotation. I definitely had somewhere that I was going with that. I've completely forgotten. But yeah, by building that base and then being able to pick from it. Yeah. And then again, we could talk about other things like burnout, becoming bored with the subject, not being able to perform a movement. Like as soon as, for example, a standing long jump turns into a layup in basketball, it's like, oh God, I've never had to coordinate left versus right. And now the hand's involved and now I'm doing other things. But I think PE as a general thing shouldn't necessarily be like basketball, cricket, rugby, hockey, whatever, but it should be developing that movement toolbox to then, if you want to apply it to those sports, you can.
You need going back to the original conversation we had about what we do in elite sports and pushing human performance, right? And I only believe what we do is increase the average. So that is a bit of a slight on what we think we do in human performance. Okay. If we're doing that with kids, that's the greatest of achievements. If we can improve the average performance physically of kids, it creates so many more opportunities for those. That's my wheelhouse. That's the thing that I think about at night is creating platform that can give the opportunity to enjoy, succeed. Succeed is a huge thing that we for some reason we try to remove. Going to some of your questions for later, from a PE setting, we try to remove success, and it doesn't come from testing. It comes from overcoming a challenge. And if we can create a challenge of which Martha, the 13 stone 9-year-old, can overcome physically, it starts to embed first psychologically something positive. There's a positive intrinsic success there that might imbue her with the enthusiasm to try another one. Whereas before, she would have happily sat behind the letter she got from her mum saying she can't do PE because it hurts her joints. And we want her to have success so that that's where enjoyment comes from. Kids won't do stuff they don't enjoy, and they don't enjoy stuff they're not good at.
Yeah. And it just going back to, again, teaching virtually, we've had loads of movement challenges which we've created as a department, and kids who aren't your sort of stereotypically sporty kids have been buzzing to send us videos. Oh, I managed to do this. And obviously normally challenges are based on, going back to what we were talking about earlier, how many reps can you do in 30 seconds, which rightly or wrongly is naturally going to bias the kid who's metabolically more able, who probably has been, like you said, maybe has been brought up in a household that mum was a sportsman, dad was a sportsman, has got a brother to play with. Something that I've just remembered the point I was going to make earlier in terms of your mechanic analogy. An analogy that Stephen Jones used in a podcast that I did with him is he said, don't dig the well so deep that you lose the bucket, which for me is you bring up a kid and you're like, right, going to be a footballer. It's like, going to be a footballer. It's like, they're 8 years old, mate. Like just, enjoy the process, expose them to different skills. I don't worry about whether they're going to enter the Premier League, because what happens when that dream dies?
That is so brilliant, but also works perfectly as to make me look like a hypocrite with superheroes, in that we don't test, but there is monitoring of assessment that kids reward themselves with stars. And because of the data set we have, we can stream for 5 different sports. So ballet, gymnastics, swimmers, rugby, and football. And footballers across the board make the slowest progress of movement mastery because they think they are awesome. That's my opinion, is that they think they're awesome. That's how my experience, that they generally are the top dog in the PE, in the primary class, and they have no time for discovery and learning because they already think they're amazing. Or maybe they already have limited movement skills because they've done the same thing so many times in football, in the pre-academy academies. Yeah, who knows?
It's funny you say that, because speaking to Ben Pullen, who his research, or part of his research, has been about movement competency in children, and he was talking to me about a paper that he'd come across as part of his research, which looked at, and I'm paraphrasing here, so I'm going to have to dig back into that podcast to find out, but they looked at different sports and which sports actually improved movement competency. And I think from memory, the only ones that did was, I think, dance, maybe ballet, but definitely dance, and gymnastics. And I agree with you in terms of football as an example. And I think, again, not to stereotype, but I think a lot of that might come down to the fact of in being a national sport in England, if you're the kid who's good at football, the PE teacher suddenly knows you. Maybe other teachers know you as being the kid who's good at football. And then, I mean, we see it all the time at school. Are we playing football today, sir? No, that's not what's in the curriculum. Well, can we play football? Well, I mean, we can do something that looks like football. And, you know, just such a narrow skill set. But then even, for example, I'll drip feed in my warm-up with like my year sevens. We'll do something like, I don't know, pretend you're jumping for a header and land on one leg. And the kid who's the best at football can't land on one leg. And you're like, there's a clear discrepancy, and you're going to spend lots of time doing single leg movements. And these movements need to have been drip fed, but all you've done is practice with the ball.
Well, ironically, usually they're good at landing on their left leg.
Yeah.
But so if we develop this into a primary school setting from a PE perspective, the PE teacher won't know that. The PE teacher won't know, the primary school PE teacher won't understand that even if the goal is to work on single leg standing skills, so standing on one leg, so I'm going to be a flamingo, so I'm going to eat like a flamingo, so going to create a hip hinge, so I'm going to hop and hold so I can catch in a variety of positions while I'm stood on one leg. If the goal is to expand that skill set, they don't know that the footballer is going to be better on their left leg than their right leg, because they do it all the time. And there's a reason for that. So what do we need to do? We need to conversely work on their right leg, challenge them to work on their right leg a little bit more. But that's one of the underpinning reasons why we as movement experts should be involved in this, and we should be creating workplace CPD for teachers to nurture their understanding of movement and of their kids' movement.
And just to dive into that question a little bit more, something that I've got jotted down is how to provide that CPD without either overwhelming teachers and thinking, oh God, where do I start with this? And B, without it becoming, which I think I've certainly been guilty of, where I've delivered a CPD, feedback's been really good, and then 2 weeks later, go back to doing what we've always done. So how do we give enough that's usable, but not give so much that it's just, I can't be bothered, I'll go back to just rolling the ball out?
I am coming to the conclusion that it's almost impossible because of the marketplace, talking from a business sense as it is, that unless we change the desired outcome. So the only way to really impact how a teacher, you can impact like 1 or 2 or 20 from a 400 workshop cohort, but you can't impact the industry unless the goal, which is set by the government, which is set by Ofsted, changes. So unless there's some kind of desired, the output of these kids needs to be similar to maths. If I see a level 6 kid of maths in year 6, they can do this. So then I can put them on this pathway when they get to secondary school. Until we see that, we can't get we can't upskill in the right way, because the intent on every different school is so completely different. There's no joined up thinking. We get the people leading PE across the country, it changes from some people with an athletic background that want kids to be more athletic and engaged in sport. You've got a couple but we're kind of getting out of this. There are ex-sports people and they are championing being a sports person, but they're very aware that those kids that can't innately be sports people, so they pretend would be a harsh word, but there's a little bit of pretense that we care about understanding the kid that's not athletic. So we have to figure out a way of getting them engaged. But from my experiences, that getting the kid that isn't athletic engaged, it seems to be doing something sat down. That's their conclusion. Let's do something that they can already do, which they might like, and they don't feel bad about themselves. And until we can change that, I don't know how we nudge the behavior of a large portion of primary school teachers and secondary school teachers. They can be nudged because they used to be sports people. At some point they end up being PE teachers because they were good at sport. I think that's the large stereotype, but it fits mostly that they still participate in sport. I think maybe the quality of pedagogical approach in these, it's diverse, it's massive, the range. You'll get some that greatly care about their kids and want to nurture all of their kids, and you'll get some that want to be friends with the kid that's going to be a footballer. It's just human nature. The thing that we need to change the country is desired outcome at primary school level, so we can impact teachers and give them a few more skills so they can identify good shapes. How I conduct workshops is to practically engage with those primary school teachers, get them rolling around on the floor and then looking at each other and going, oh, that's the shape that I just saw on the presentation up there. And so they can start to identify the appropriate shapes that we're after, the good fundamental movement patterns. And then they can start to embed that into their practice rather than getting a whole new lesson. That I'm not giving lesson plans out here. You have your lesson. The way I think about it is you're a teacher, you know your kids, you have a lesson plan, you have an idea in mind. If I can we talked about this off pod earlier, was that the only underlying thread I see in all primary schools is that at some point they will do marching. And on the surface, it seems stupid, right? And when I've gone into different schools, I see it taught in a very robotic way. And the outcome of the marching, I'm not entirely sure of the intent, but it's very robotic. There's it's following commands. There's lots of shouting going on, or a variety of let's giggle at this point so we know the kids are having fun. And with a little bit of understanding of how a kid sees themselves and fits within movement and sport, we can really nurture that same lesson into teamwork, into empowering leadership, in putting them in small groups, timing, rhythm, coordination. We can challenge them with with getting them to get their knee above their hip. So you start to create like a hip lock in position, then make a loud noise, make a quiet noise with your foot. And you're talking a variety of force production. Can you do it while you're skipping? Can you march in place while you're skipping? Can you march forwards, sideways? Can you march up this hill? Can you do it with a log in the way? Then we can challenge the exact same PE lesson with specific physiological and behavioral adaptations in place, but just with a little, change of perspective from whoever's delivering the session.
I think what you're saying there kind of reminds me of something that Howard Green spoke about with dealing with kids. And in terms of looking at the research, most LTAD models talk about it being relatively unstructured with kids, which Howard and I agree is, I would argue, couldn't be further from the truth. It's just the structure is disguised. As you said, a teacher watching you do what you've just described there is probably not thinking, oh, this is similar to the hip lock position that we see in other sports. Or for example, this is improving range of motion by bringing that knee up higher, or this is improving proprioception by landing with a loud noise versus a quiet noise. So what I really like about that is you're giving, this is specifically what they're doing, but here's the sort of hidden structure and here's the things we're actually working on versus, right, everyone do the same, knee up, knee down, let's all have a laugh, and we've sort of ticked that box onto the next one.
It's similar to me in the way I would teach maths. If my wife gave me a lesson plan for 3 maths lessons of year 4 kids, I would read this lesson plan and then I would tell the kids to follow this lesson plan, right? If she taught these kids the lesson plan, she would be getting the best development out of those kids at learning and understanding numeracy with this intent. She is an expert in that stuff, and I don't see experts in movement and in coaching teaching PE in primaries, and that's okay. But how can they be experts when they've done, very often, this is without exaggeration, 1 afternoon of PE training in an entire 3-year period of doing a BEd? How can they be experts?
Yeah.
We are experts. We have done 3, 4, 5, 6 years of academic study, and then I've done 20 years of in-play practical experience. We are the experts. We need to be doing this on the rock face and guiding these kids and teachers as much as we can. If we get, for an example would be like, if you get anybody listening to this, contact me. I will give you superheroes so that you can go and contact 5 or 6 of your local schools, and you can go and work 1 afternoon in each school of those 5 schools and develop their kids' fundamental movements, right? Because we are the ones that can lead to change here. And if we start coaching kids and giving kids the opportunity to understand the good shapes and the fundamental movements and where they appear within themselves, but also in their environment, and then that they know how best appropriately to move, that they can see it in all of their sports, that the teachers in their schools will start to adopt it, and it will become common language to them as well, and then it changes everything.
You mentioned just a second ago about when you deliver CPD, you don't, for example, say, here's the lesson plan. So from a logistics standpoint, with your superheroes delivery, or how you get people to deliver it, what does that, and again, I know this is missing out massive context, but what does that look like? So I'm just thinking with my teacher hat on, potentially 5 iPads, a load of props, which I imagine kids go mental for, 30 kids, 1 teacher. How does that lesson look like? So I'm assuming that they probably, or maybe they do, the StrengthLab Superheroes for the entire lesson. Is it drip fed? Is it circuit based? How does that look logistically, if that makes sense?
Well, as I said, these are the minimum standards. These are the minimum tools that I want your kids to learn, right? In an ideal world, you will adopt those into your PE lesson. But sadly, that's not how it's worked. It's been kind of a barrier in that I'm not providing lesson plans and scheme of works for the PE teacher that is full-time, that's their job. They're like, well, can't you do this for me? No, that's never the point. It was never the point. But so it's been reduced from the ideal of getting S&Cs into schools to be delivering this stuff into kids teaching themselves, because teachers are too busy and their focus is not really on what's going to go on in that PE lesson. So I'm fully embracing that schools, the worst part of schools is that they have iPads everywhere. So like you said, 5 iPads, we split the group into 5, we split the class into 5 groups. Each one becomes the superhero of the week. So one of them is Iron Man, one of them is Spider-Man, one is Superman, whatever. And there'll be a leader within each of those. So how the session works is that I will talk, if I'm going in, I will talk to the teacher before and see what their current topic is. In a primary school, there will be some kind of geographic element to that. And then I'll pick 5 animals from whatever their region that they're studying. So it links into their subject. And I have 2 crawling, a swimming, a balancing, and a jumping animal that they have to pick out from their geographic location. The thing that they're looking at currently, and we work on those as a little warm-up drill of them going through crawling around the room. Sometimes we add a little game element of this. You have to, there'll be opposing animals, so like a shark and a dolphin, and then they have to stay away from that, or they have to get to islands, you know, this typical PE stuff, but a little bit linked to their subject. And we start to look at good shapes. So I can tend to see, as I'm sure you can as a coach, the good movers in that warm-up. I will identify those good movers. And if I've got 5 of them, I'll put them as the leaders of each of the groups. They have the iPad. They look at the video of their exercises. They go through the coaching points of their exercises, and they'll go off with their group and go and practice themselves amongst themselves, looking at what they should be doing. After like 10 minutes, they'll go to the middle of the group, middle of the class, in the middle of the hall, and they will demonstrate, and then they'll go around and spend 5 minutes coaching all of the other groups, and they'll rotate with each. And every week there'll be a different leader, and they'll have a different superhero the next week. So each of them have a turn of being each superhero, and each of them have a turn of being a leader. And at the end, they will go and assess one another with the little iPads. They're mean. So you don't get a star unless you absolutely deserved it from a 5-year-old.
Oh, absolutely. And I can imagine there's probably no worse a situation than having to deal with than one kid saying that they've had their star taken off them by another kid. Something I meant to ask earlier, probably should have kicked off the podcast with it, but hey ho, was just where the idea of superheroes for developing movement competency came from, and what that process looked like from a coaching perspective.
I suppose there was the talk of how do we engage kids, and how do we brand in this current climate, how do we brand it so that kids can identify with it? And it just came about at the same time, pretty much as the first Avengers movie started. And that was probably the most popular thing in the world at the time. 5 years before, it might have been some kind of Star Wars. And so originally they were completely different superheroes than the ones we had. I was looking at how can I model a strand of these exercises against something that resembles the movement of this character. And so originally we had the Thing from Fantastic Four with the bashing, and we had Silver Surfer for lying on his surfboard, creating that plank position and working around that mat or plank position. And they got quickly, over the course of maybe the first 12 incarnations of the website, they gradually faded out and got replaced by more recognizable figures, just from talking to the kids, which people were more popular with them, because we want them to be more identifiable. And they ended up over the course of maybe 6 months of the first year becoming Iron Man, Spider-Man, Thor, Superman, and Hulk. And we tried to build character traits within there, like with the big Hulk smash, and then we got inflatable hammers for the Thor, because then you've got an external stimulus to aim for, basically. So with a Thor, with Thor's hammer, you can change where the hammer's going to hit on the floor. You give them a target, and it completely changes their lunge range and intensity and pattern. And so it was really around engagement. At the time, we were really intent on getting a girl. I have a daughter who's now 16, but she was like 10, 11 at the time. And it was imperative at the time to get a female superhero just because you want to, you know, develop those relationships for those girls. But while we're in our loose market research with the kids, probably 300 or 400 kids we were dealing with at the time, they didn't identify with any women. And there were no big famous female superheroes. It was just part of the time. Only 5 years ago, Black Widow was the single female, and she didn't have any moves unless kids are now going to be jumping around people's necks and swinging their legs around their throat to drag them to the floor, which is probably above the fundamental level that we can get kids to be doing. But kids didn't even know who they were, because if you remember, the first Avengers movie was really an adult thing. It was the beginning of watering down to the kids. So yeah, there were no identifiable girls to attach to. So that was, always felt a little bit of a problem to us. But in the first 3 years, I didn't have a single question about the gender of the superheroes, which is really interesting. We get it quite a lot now, but yeah, not at the time, not once.
Yeah, I mean, all my brain can think of is Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head losing their genders, but story for a different day. So my next question relates to the work that I've seen you do with Derby County's Academy and their girls, because I've seen you do a lot of superhero stuff with them. So I'm intrigued as to whether, from an engagement perspective, they just bought into it straight away, or whether it was just because it was something new from, I suppose, the traditional strength and conditioning that they'd been used to. So just want to chat about how that process evolved with them.
My experience with that, and with all of the teenagers that we work with, were particularly ones that had some kind of traditional, we talk traditional, but S&C's really been only for 10 years in any kind of academy setting. That they were just happy they weren't being tested. And the things I ask them to do they can be, for teenagers, a little embarrassing, particularly for girls. I learned quickly that the most important factor was that they are a little bit self-conscious. So it was a matter of nurturing ways to overcome that, and identifying the girls that weren't so self-conscious at the front, but then also trying to nurture the ones that were more self-conscious. And largely them seeing a bald 40-year-old dude make an idiot of himself kind of broke the ice enough for them to join in and ridicule similarly. So I nurtured the things that they were each good at, and they were all good at some stuff. You don't get to an academy level without having some athletic skills. Yeah, they picked that up quite quickly, and they were, I don't know how much you work with girls, but it's a very, very different experience to working with academy boys.
Yeah, definitely.
They're collaborative. They want to work together. They don't want to stand out. They want to be the same as everybody. So if you can get one or two of the leaders, they're all going to do it. And I was fortunate enough to align with the right girls in the squad early on, that they were the champions, and they drove the culture within themselves. So I just nudged them to do this challenge this week, or this one, or this one, or this one, and then gradually that they had a big toolbox of the things that we wanted to do, of the different types of drills, the curved running or the hurdles, jumping, hopping, plyo stuff, because I only get half an hour with each group anyway. I would create a block. This is my desired outcome. And so I would just change the intensity or complexity, but they would pick the exercises for that week.
Yeah, and I suppose that in itself differentiates for those who, I don't know, might feel silly doing, I don't know, the slower versions, the more coordinatively progressive versions. So yeah, they can still work on a similar outcome without necessarily feeling like they're going to embarrass themselves.
Yeah, very much. But I think largely I worked from the opposite angle, in that we would do the more complex versions. So Superheroes was always only part of warm-up with them. and we would do the more complex ones so everybody fell over. Then once everybody had fallen over, there was no risk of falling over anymore.
Yeah.
And so that'll be it. I'll get one or two girls that could pull a backflip, and if they could pull a backflip, you're never going to embarrass them. But they were largely didn't want to stand out anyway, so they were always kind of embarrassed. But yeah, it removed that barrier for sure. If you make I'm also willing to fall over. If you can get that out of the way early with everybody, then you can just get on with it, and they kind of enjoyed it, and they could see quickly that it was harder than they expected. So there was more of a coordination and physical challenge than they were expecting to do by doing these kids exercises. And that gave them the buy-in, because they're academy kids that see themselves playing for England one day. So then they were serious athletes in their minds.
Yeah, I think breaking down those kind of barriers is really important. And just to cycle back to a sort of theme that I asked you about earlier, and that was about what StrengthLab Superheros looks like in the context of a lesson. And you basically said in your CPD, look, this isn't me saying do it exactly like this. I'm just giving you another tool to your toolbox. We talk about sport within PE, and I know, for example, I've been quite vocal on previous podcasts about, I suppose separating is the wrong word, but I've used separating sport from PE. And I suppose that would make people think, oh, so we're going to do an entire lesson on, I don't know, these physical literacy skills. And I was trying to say, no, it's not one or the other. It's just a tool in the toolbox. So how would you go about, whether we use sport as the theme or not, developing physical literacy, I suppose, within a sporting context, so kids can kind of see the relevance?
I think it depends completely on the age and the training history of which cohort you're talking about, really.
Go on.
Go on.
I was going to say, let's just for ease, because it's a cohort that I particularly enjoy working with, but year 7s and 8s, so 11 to 13. Right.
So I would always use Superheros as the warm up from that, and then expand with some of the shapes that they will be using within the sport that you're going to be teaching afterwards. And then I would stop randomly throughout whatever sporting drill that they're going to be doing in the games afterwards and go, what can you see? And they start to see the shape that they're making in the warm-ups, which then reinforces the importance of those things that they're working on. And then we can expand that with intensity and complexity, and you get much more of a buy-in for that. And if I can pinpoint this is a good version of this shape, and can you see a bad version of this shape, then if you can make anything competitive for kids, they love that, and they love ridiculing each other too. So a whole little bit of that comes in there too. From a secondary perspective, just the coaching style of that is that going into sports, you already have a barrier of those kids that can do that sport already. So if you're playing hockey, you in secondary school, you're gonna have two kids that have got posh parents or parents that played hockey, so that they've played hockey their whole life, and they're superheroes compared to everybody else, and it's a different sport. So there's barely any point playing with those kids, because the things they can do has got nothing to do. It's just a different sport to the rest. It's like playing table tennis with an expert. In football, it's going to be obviously different. There's going to be more kids that can play well. But how I would approach coaching these things is to add individual constraints to each of the kids at their appropriate skill level, so that they're achieving something each independently from one another. So if you've got the superhero that can flick from the halfway line to the top corner, that you find the thing that they're not the best at, or that they're lesser at, and you award points for that to them, and then you award a point so they can't score from the half, but they get a point for their team if they pass to somebody that scores in the final third, or you nurture somebody to they get a point if they can flick from the final third of the pitch, or you get a point, you get 3 points for this kid who's, is working on dribbling that week, if they can beat somebody. And they get 1 point if they don't beat them, but they did attempt to dribble. And then you're gradually racking up points for the team. It's not about actual goals. It's about developing those skills within that team, within that environment of playing hockey.
Yeah, it reminds me, I mean, one of the CPDs I did do on my teacher training year, which I did actually really rate, was we had some guys come in from, there's an FA Teachers Award, and they had these things called challenge cards, which basically you set off into 2 teams and then you try and achieve these challenges, and they're not necessarily related to scoring a goal. Like you said, it might be beating a player, performing this kind of, I don't know, tactical maneuver. And I think it's great because so many kids get focused on, did we win, did we lose? And for example, I deliberately do it where I have the really good team against the rubbish team and then condition the good team to within an inch of their life. And they still want to know what score it was, even though, for example, only winning 2-0 against a team who doesn't know their ass from their elbow isn't that good if you're playing in an academy.
Yeah, exactly that. You need to gamify it in a way that imbues success, that gives the challenges a kid in a way that they can get some success from their individual actions. And then from a sports perspective, as part of a team, so they also feel like they did something which helped their team too, because that's really fundamental to sports.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite an embarrassing reflection, really. But in the conversations I've had with my kids whilst we've been teaching PE virtually, one of our challenges, amongst a load of movement challenges, we also asked kids for their favourite sporting moment, hoping they would say stuff like, I don't know, England winning the Rugby World Cup, or, whatever. And some kids were saying stuff like, oh, I scored 2 goals in primary school. And you're like, wow, they've like really attached onto that winning mentality, which is fine. But you think of all the sport you've been exposed to that one time when you're in primary school, and this is normally from kids who, for the record, aren't very sporting, but that one moment of success has stayed with them. Whereas, to a teacher or to somebody else, that was just another day.
I think that is amazing. And I think that should be used when talking about those kids, about developing programs for those kids that don't like PE, because they do like PE. They love the opportunity to like PE. They would love the opportunity for other kids in their class to like them for doing something good at PE. Give them the opportunity.
Yeah, I remember one of my year 7s, bless him, he's definitely a bit overweight, like not your sporty kid. And we were playing, rounders was on the curriculum, so we were doing a conditioned game. So he takes this, I was like, take your hands out your pockets. So then puts his hands in his hat and like, take your hands out your hat. And then he's like, puts it there, he's like, how much will you give me if I catch it in here? I was like, you can have a house point. First shot, bang, flies straight in the hat. And this kid is like the hero of the lesson and everyone's applauding him. But we so infrequently give kids like that the opportunity to shine, or the opportunity, like you said, if you give them the opportunity, they will enjoy it. But for example, if you're that kid who's rubbish, who can't add 1 and 1, and all your lessons are about quadratic equations, obviously they're not going to engage in that lesson.
Exactly.
And just in wrapping things up, if you were to give the listeners one key take home from today's podcast, what would you like that to be?
Jesus. Not Jesus. It would be to go and find out the thing that you enjoy coaching the most, and then figure out somebody that's better at it already and email them and see if you can create a connection with them, because in my experience, they'll happily help. And as long as you are honest and humble in how you approach, they will happily help you in your path to mastering the thing that you enjoy doing most, and then go get some experience doing it.
That's a lovely answer. And this one I'm intrigued by. If you could go and observe one coach, one teacher, whatever, with their athletes or with their kids, who would you choose to observe and why?
If I could, I don't know, from my own perspective, now I'm old, but if I could recommend you go and see somebody coach, it would be go to one of your inner city schools, a secondary school, and find out their good PE teacher and go and watch them, how they control their group of 50 or 60 insane, rabid kids that don't want to do anything but beat each other, and see how they control the group, see how they encourage participation in one another within that group. I think that would probably be the most important thing for your career. Not what I would like to see would be, I don't know, Charlie Francis.
Solid.
It's not possible, but that would be very, very, very cool. Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to watch and be around and chat with some of the best of our kind of industry coaches. So there are lots and lots and lots of great ones. But find yours, I think, rather than listen to me. Jesus.
That's a solid point. But what I love there is you've kind of highlighted the sort of driver behind this whole podcast, in the sense of, I really enjoy speaking to people from high performance sport, but I also really enjoy speaking to someone who, like yourself, could engage a bunch of 5-year-olds. And I think it's easy for people who don't work in these settings to be like, as an example, a Charlie Francis, while working with Olympic medalists, therefore is a better coach than this person who works with 5-year-olds. And like, well, no, coaching is coaching, and they're just different skill sets applied in different environments. And both, is not to say that your level of outcome in terms of a gold medal somehow makes you a better or worse coach than somebody who works with little children.
You wouldn't even make this comparison, right, about two lawyers. One lawyer that worked for Barings Bank in Manhattan on acquisitions, and a divorce lawyer from Manchester. You wouldn't compare the two. Their job titles are the same. They're both lawyers. They've both been to law school, but their skill sets are so very different, and they can both be brilliant.
Yeah. I can't remember which podcast I listened to. It's somebody who's involved in youth sport, and they basically said that they got into youth sport after they got basically heard a few honest truths from their line manager, who basically told them to get lost when he was like, I want to work with, I don't know, the under 16s, so then I can work with the 18s, so then I can work with the 21s. And he's like, look, if you don't want to be here with the under 16s, then, or if you just see this as a fast track to the first team, is like, I don't want you here, because this is a very specific skill set. It's not just a step ladder until you get to the 21s or the first team.
Exactly. And if you wanted to speak to anybody in the industry about this, you should speak to Des Ryan, who he oversees and has created a culture at Arsenal which champions the great coaches of youth and children, and nurtures those skill sets, and they couldn't be further from what's required at the, I don't even say elite level because it's nonsense, at the adult level, adult professional level. They're just different.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got a jacket on it that says first team or elite, then you're elite. Let's just ignore any sort of physical or athletic capabilities.
Yeah, that's it.
And by all means, feel free to talk about your own stuff. But if you had to talk about one recommended resource, so an app, a podcast, obviously the stuff you do with StrengthLab Superheros.
Oh my God. Yeah, as I said before, anybody just hit me up. I'll give you access. There is, I don't know where my phone is. For any sports scientists or anybody working in the field on pitches, there is, go and look up the apps for Sprint Timer. There's a whole series of them, Nordics, jump height. And so basically there's this one dude who was awesome, Marco, I think his name is, and he's developed, I've been using Sprint Timer for 2 or 3 years, but he's nurtured this, he's created this whole battery, and they cost like 20 quid. and it will save you, I think, the equivalent of £27,000 of actual equipment, of timing gates, of range of motion, of detection. It has some biomechanic monitoring and force plates. So go check those out. That's well worth your 20 quid.
I'm gonna check. I think I know what you're on about, but I'm gonna chuck that in the show notes. And finally, I think you've kind of mentioned it. You kind of mentioned it throughout the podcast, but if people want to hear more about your work or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Twitter, if you don't mind me swearing a lot, Simon Brundish, or UK_StrengthLab. We are StrengthLab Superheros on Instagram, or Simon at strengthlab.co.uk. There you go.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Simon. Unless there's any parting shot that you'd like to add, I think that's a nice place to wrap up.
Check out our you've talked about Howard a couple of times during this. Yes. We have a new venture which utilizes both 35 years worth of experience of ours, work in athletic development, and his within athletic development of tennis. And we utilize superheroes as the strength element of a program we call the SMASH program, which has mobility, agility, stability, and honing coordination. And it's called Tennis Super Movers. We'll be rolling it out to athletic super movers across the board, but this is the next version. This is what happens after you do strength exercises, or really the fundamentals of movement, into locomotor, and then start to have external cueing and rhythm, and start moving about. And this is good fun for kids, and developed by people that kind of know what they're talking about.
Excellent. I'll chuck links to those in the show notes as well. Thank you very much for giving up so much of your time, Simon. It's been a pleasure.
It's always great to chat, dude.